Do what God commands you and be ready to face an angry mob. That was Gideon's experience, and I believe it will be our experience more and more these days. I'm Ken Gideon, and this is A Layman Looks at Scripture. Thanks for joining us in our study of Judges. Today looking at chapter 6, verses 28 to 32. Gideon, at God's command, had just taken down his father's symbol of idolatry, the idol of Baal. He built an altar to the Lord nearby. He did all this during the night. Early the next morning, probably as the devout idol worshippers went to say their morning prayers, the men of the city noticed the torn down altar and the cut down Asherah trees or grove, and that the second bull had been sacrificed to God. They wondered who had done this. Asking around, they soon determined it was indeed Gideon, the son of Joash. In addition, it may well have been known that Gideon wasn't big on Baal worship, so it made sense he might be the one who did this. So they went after Dad and demanded that he give them his son so that he might be killed by them because of what he had done. David Gusick says this shows just how powerful Baal worship was in Israel at the time. And he quotes Wolfe, who wrote, quote, "The heresy had become the main religion." End of quote. Matthew Henry writes, "By the law of God, the worshippers of Baal were to die, but these wicked men impiously turned the penalty upon the worshippers of the God of Israel." How prodigiously mad were they upon their idols? Was it not enough to offer the choicest of their bullocks to Baal, but must the bravest youth of their city fall as a sacrifice to that dunghill deity when they pretended he was provoked? How soon will idolaters become persecutors? End of quote. Now put yourself in Joash's shoes. It's early in the morning. You're still trying to deal with what happened the night before and why your son did what he did. And you've got this mob at your door demanding you turn him over to be killed for his actions. What do you do? The issue arises for us to consider. What is the role of blood versus religion? Joash had given way in his religion to Baal worship. But as a father, he still loved his son, and he could not deny the wonderful qualities of the young man he had raised. Matthew Henry provides us this backstory to his actions, which we will cover in a moment. He writes, quote, "Out of natural affection to his son, and perhaps a particular esteem for him as a virtuous, valiant, valuable young man, and never the worse for not joining with him in the worship of Baal. Many that have not courage enough to keep their integrity themselves, yet have so much conscience left as makes them love and esteem those that do. If Joash had a kindness for Baal, yet he had a greater kindness for his son." End of quote. How many a parent or grandparent comes to the rescue of their own child or grandchild, even when they don't agree with the younger's behavior or stance, because they love them so much? In Gideon's case, it was much easier for Joash, for perhaps Joash realized his son was in the right, and he himself was in the wrong when it came to worshiping Baal versus Jehovah. Love has to trump behavior. While we don't condone some behavior, we do not have the option of not loving and not doing all we can to show that love. So Joash responds as follows. And perhaps we'd best understand what he said by looking at a more modern translation, the New Living Translation, which states verse 31 as follows. "Why are you defending Baal? Will you argue his case?" Joash says to the mob. "Whoever pleads his case will be put to death by morning. If Baal truly is a god, let him defend himself and destroy the one who broke down his altar." That was a lot easier for me to understand than some of the more traditional versions. He asked the mob if they are trying to defend Baal and argue on his behalf. Clearly they were or seemed to be. It's the next sentence we may need some more guidance on. What was Joash really saying when he said, "Whoever pleads Baal's case will be put to death by morning"? Who would put whom to death? The study notes in the NET Bible are very helpful here on that statement. Here's what they say, quote, "This may be a warning to the crowd that Joash intends to defend his son and to kill anyone who tries to execute Gideon. Then again, it may be a sarcastic statement about Baal's apparent inability to defend his own honor. Anyone who takes up Baal's cause may end up dead, perhaps by the same hand that pulled down the pagan god's altar." End of quote. Then Joash gets this brilliant idea to appease the mob. He says, look, if Baal is really a god as we think or thought him to be, he'll defend himself and destroy the one who tore down this altar, or his altar. Smart man. He knew who done it. But was he still pretending to the mob that he didn't? Who knows? Doesn't matter. Anyway, that was the message Joash gave to the men of the city, which, as of this point in our story, we have no other indication that the mob was not satisfied with his argument, and they probably returned to their homes. But I am sure, as a father, Joash still had to deal with the disappointment of his son's behavior. Or maybe it wasn't disappointment. Our text says in verse 32, he changed his name to Jerubbaal, which means let Baal fight against him. He did this because Gideon had torn down Baal's altar. Another commentator, Trapp, says the name means a man against whom Baal is to strive and contend, a title of honor. What are the lessons for us? As I read my newspaper each day or surf the internet or watch the news on TV, I am more and more convinced today that there's a mob of godless men and women out there that want to do away with Christians. We offend them. We stifle their goals. We remind them of the righteous judge that will someday judge them. They hate us. We're where Gideon was, folks. Godliness has become the order of the day in our society. We are a minority, but we are a minority plus God. We can't forget that. Secondly, if Joash supported his son as he did, even when Gideon acted against his father's sin, how much more must we stand up for those in our families who stand up for Jesus? God help us if we are ever to be ashamed of them and their stance for God. Thirdly, even when our children or grandchildren are wrong or are acting contrary to God's will for their lives as we see it, we must show them the love we're commanded to show. That does not mean condoning their wrongdoing, but it does mean being loving parents or grandparents towards them, and then leaving the rest to God. Join us next time as Gideon sets up another test for God. I can't for the life of me understand the need for it, but obviously Gideon did, and so did God. But would that even be enough?